Now let's take a look at the Sandbox Tools. But first we need to make sure that our Sandbox Tools are available or enabled within our Extensions menu. So we can go to our Window drop-down and choose Preferences, and then go to our Extensions tab, and if we scroll down you can see that we have our Sandbox Tools. If yours are already checked on, go ahead and leave those alone. If it's not checked on, let's go ahead and do that now. And we'll say OK. So now we have our Sandbox Tools loaded up. I find that it's always a good idea to just close SketchUp and then restart it whenever you're loading or unloading any plugins or extensions. So go ahead and close that, restart it, and then we'll be ready to go with our Sandbox Tools. So I'll scoot these over here to the side, and what we're going to do is import some CAD files and kind of demonstrate the Sandbox Tools. Now, as the title Sandbox Tools would suggest, these are for kind of organic modeling and kind of playing with sand and creating these shapes. So we'll take a look at creating contours or a 3D mesh from a 3D digital survey or contour lines, and then also some other ways that we can modify that mesh once we've created it. So what we'll do first is import some of these CAD drawings. So we'll go to File and choose Import. And we want to pull in first our topo. So let's also take a look at our options. And when you click on options, notice we have our geometry. We can choose to merge coplanar faces, which is always a good idea, and also orient faces consistently. And that just kind of puts all the fronts to the front and backs to the back, and if it actually works or in a way that is useful to you, that's great, but I think it's good to keep it checked on. So now the scale, though, this is where it gets a little tricky. Almost always, you always want to preserve the drawing origin, because then anything else we pull in is going to stack right in place where it's supposed to be. Now the units, that's kind of a crapshoot sometimes, because if you're using other people's drawings, you might not know what their default units are. So you could go and open those in CAD and check the units from there, or you could just use trial and error in SketchUp. So we're going to import as inches, and I actually know for a fact that these CAD drawings are the default unit is in inches, so we'll be all set. But if you do find that it comes in and it's at a wacky scale, you should probably just go back and import it again and change it to feet. So we'll say OK, and then we're going to select our green topo drawing, and also you want to make sure that under Files of Type you have that set to AutoCAD. So it's often confusing if it's set to all supported image types. You're not going to see any DWGs. So we need to make sure that our Files of Type drop down is set to our AutoCAD files. And then we can select our green topo DWG and choose Open. And then here's our import results. That's all good. We can do a zoom extents and then orbit into 3D and take a look at what we've imported. So here's all of your topo lines from that topographic survey, and it's always good to do a reality check. Just take your tape measure tool and then maybe just measure. I'll click on this line and tap the up arrow key to lock my blue axis and verify. You can see that that is a 1 foot contour. So that's a reality check. It works the way it's supposed to. It's not like 500 feet. That would be kind of weird. So we're all set with this drawing. Always good to do a reality check before you get into it. Okay, so now we can use our selection tool and draw a selection window around that entire site survey. And we'll click on the first of our Sandbox tools called From Contours. When you click on that, it's going to automatically generate a 3D mesh that represents those contour lines. So how easy is that? Now I can press Control A. If I hold down Control and tap A and select all, and then hold down Shift and remove that new 3D mesh from my selection. And then I'll just tap Delete. We'll get rid of those contour lines because we really don't need them anymore. They're represented within this 3D mesh. So our 3D mesh is actually as accurate as our contour lines. Next, let's go to File and choose Import. And we're going to pull in our roads. So this is a flat 2D drawing. And notice that because we preserved the drawing origin, this comes in stacked right on top. Also take note that you don't need to keep going into the import options and checking those, because once you set them, those become your defaults. So now we can just import everything and we know it's all going to come in the same. So with our roads, we can actually use our Drape tool. And it's always good to pre-select our roads and then click on the Drape tool and then click on the 3D mesh that you want to drape. Now what this is going to do is take your 2D drawing and kind of let it fall on to the 3D mesh and draw those lines in 3D. So now they have a Z value to them. So we can erase our 2D roads drawing. And now you can imagine how difficult that would have been to draw without having the Drape tool. Alright, so now this site is coming together nicely. Let's import our building footprint. So we'll go to our footprint and choose Open. And again, it comes in stacked right where it's supposed to be. And now we can go to our selection tool, pre-select our building footprint, and then click on our stamp tool. So when you click on the stamp tool has an offset. You can see what it's going to do is actually kind of embed or stamp this footprint into the site. So the offset, think of that, it's almost like the foundation wall. And I think 2 feet is pretty good for this particular model. So now I just click on my mesh, and we can see down here it's kind of cranking away. And now I need to click one more time. I can kind of move my cursor around here and click once there. And so now we've stamped that footprint into the ground. So with a little bit of 2D CAD line work and our site survey, it's pretty easy to add a lot of detail to a site using the Sandbox tools. So we can get rid of this guy, and let's just add a little bit more detail to this site. I'll double click into that group, and let's go to our paint bucket tool. And here's on the asphalt and concrete menu, we can maybe throw some concrete on here for the slab, some asphalt on the roads, and we can go to our stone menu and maybe throw some stone on this wall here. Something like that. And then we can also go to our vegetation library and throw some grass on here as well. So just like that, we've got a nice little site pulled together, and we can start building our house on top of it. Alright, so now we can close our materials browser, and let's go ahead and start a new file here. We'll go to File, choose New, and I'm not going to save those changes. Now we have some other tools as well. This another way to create contours would be from scratch. So the from scratch allows us to create a grid. And you can see when I click on from scratch, it tells me my grid spacing. Now be careful with this, because if you make your grid too small, it can be pretty easy to add a lot of geometry to your model all at once, and that can really slow you down or even crash SketchUp. And also, for that matter, it's really a good idea anytime you're using the Sandbox tools, you should almost always save before you perform any operation. And it's not that they're glitchy, it's just that if you were to drape something on an extremely complex piece of geometry, it could lock your computer up and basically crash. So sometimes it's just a really, not sometimes, all the time, it's a great idea to save before you do anything with the Sandbox tools. Okay, so we clicked on our From Scratch tool, and our grid spacing, let's make that 12 inches. And then to do this, to create a grid or from scratch, we just click once to start, and I'll move down here roughly 30 feet and then start moving in the green direction to create my grid. So really all that From Scratch does is create a grid. But now what we can do is use our Smooth tool. So this is a flat grid, and the Smooth tool allows us to kind of morph and modify this grid. So we'll go to my Selection tool, and we actually need to be inside of this grid group. So I'll double click, and now I can tell that I'm inside of that group because I see the bounding box, and typically the rest of your model will be grayed out a little bit. And so the Smooth tool, I'll click on that guy, and you can see that now the Smooth tool in the value control box, or the measurements dialog box there, it gives us a radius, and this radius of 50 feet is way too big, so let's try 20 feet. And even that's kind of big. We'll say 5 feet. Okay, so now we can just click once to start, move our cursor, and click again to finish. And so we can kind of use this to mound and create these depressions and mountains in our site. And if you want to change the radius, I just type in a new radius, 15 feet, enter. And now I can kind of smooth all of this up. So it's a fun tool to use. It's admittedly not that accurate. I mean, you're just, it's good for kind of a quick sketch model and trying to generate a quick site. But as far as accuracy goes, you really don't have a whole lot of control over what you're doing. So just keep that in mind. But to finish this off, though, you know, we really don't want to see all of these grid lines. So what you can do is just triple click and then right click and choose Soften/Smooth Edges. And this allows you to just slide that to the right, and you can soften up those edges. Now, if you're still seeing some that aren't softening, just check on that coplanar, and that'll get rid of the rest. And now we have that nice smooth grid, or a nice smooth mesh more so. So again, smoothing the edges doesn't necessarily erase them, it's just making them not a hard line. So we can go to View, Hidden Geometry, and you can see that those edges are still there. It's just that they're softened. Now, just to complete this thought on the Sandbox tools, I'll say that these last two tools, I cannot even remember the last time I used these. These almost never come into play for me. What you can do with these, though, there's Add Detail and Flip Edge. So Add Detail, it basically just kind of allows you to break a triangle and adjust it. And Flip Edge allows it basically does exactly what it says, flips the edge. So I'll just demonstrate those. Honestly, they really never come into play, but we're talking about the Sandbox tools, so we might as well cover it. So I'll go to View, Hidden Geometry, and then if I go to let's Add Detail, and then I can just click on an edge and see it kind of breaks everything for me. So I can just add some detail to that. But honestly, that really never comes into play, and it's never really all that helpful to do that. I'll just use my eraser tool and soften those edges. Now, flip edge, that just flips it around. So sometimes when you're working on a model, you run into a situation where you just need the triangles to go the other way, and flip edge is a quick way to fix that. Again, very, very rarely does that ever come into play. Now, let me do one more example here. I'm going to start a new document and close this. And I want to demonstrate the Simplify Contours plugin. So we're going to go back here and go to File, Import, and pull in the topo here. And I've already kind of simplified this, the contours on this file. So, but to get an idea of how this works, Simplify Contours will reduce the amount of edges that it takes to represent one contour line. And in doing so, it's going to reduce the amount of faces that it takes to represent that 3D mesh that shows this this site. So Ultimately, this is how you build a more efficient model. You don't want to use 1,000,000 faces to represent something that it only takes 500 faces to represent. So we can check on the number of edges that are in a contour line by triple clicking on a contour line, and then right click on it and choose Entity Info. Now you can see that this contour line is composed of 36 edges. You can see each individual edge here. So what you can do though is triple click it and go to Plugins and choose Simplify. Now Simplify launches this new dialog, and we can choose how many degrees of the angle are we choosing to simplify. And basically what this means is that if two edges, when they come together, are 10 degrees or less, they will basically become one edge. So let's just say OK, and then check that, and you can see we only got rid of one edge there, so 35. Now if we were to increase that to 15, I'm pretty sure that we'd lose a few more edges there. So we'll go to Simplify, and let's set this to 15 and choose OK. And now we're down to 34 edges. So that's about as efficient as it gets. And you can see over here how it kind of joins some of those edges together into one line. And that may or may not be ideal. If I tap Control Z, we can see that go back to where it was. So if you have something around 100 edges representing a contour line, then yeah, you should definitely simplify. But if you're down to like 30, 20, 10, that's really doing pretty well, and you're not going to be flexing the system too hard when that goes into a 3D mesh.